Catholic Church in Austin, Texas. Welcome to Extraordinary Catholics, where we profile some, you guessed it, extraordinary Catholics. We all know that there are various Catholic churches in our world, and we're familiar with the ordinary Catholics who comprise the largest Catholic churches of the world, including the Roman Catholic Church with over 1 billion followers. The second largest Catholic church is the Orthodox Church, which excommunicated the Roman Church in 1054, has over 300 million followers, a fascinating story. But there are several other smaller, what we call independent or autocephalous churches, which share valid sacraments with the people of God, but are free from the structures and the strictures of Rome. So today, let's meet someone from one of those smaller independent Catholic churches. Today, we have the pleasure of meeting an extraordinary Catholic who serves as at the Pilgrim Chapel of Contemplative Conscience, part of the Catholic Apostolic Church of Antioch. Father Scott Carter, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm really, really happy to be here.
Tremendous. Father Scott, tell us about your vocation. How did you first feel called to serve God's people?
Yeah, so I was one of those people that had a really circuitous route to where I am now. It's not all that uncommon, I think. I was born Roman Catholic, raised Roman Catholic, and as I became an adolescent and started running through all my issues of conscience and trying to figure out what everything meant in the bigger world, I just could not stay within that construct. So when I was in college, I was an English major. I have a bachelor's in English, but at the time I was also taking courses in psychology and Buddhism, Taoism, what they at the time called comparative religion.
Right.
And it was something that I connected with easily and I felt very drawn to. Did not really think much about how my spiritual life would be expressed in the world in a concrete way for a long time. Had a child, and as most people who've had kids know, it really does shake things up, and it really caused me to reconsider my priorities. And from that point on, I felt more and more drawn toward finding some way to actually bring out the spiritual side of myself more directly. What eventually happened was that I discovered Sophia Divinity School, which turned out to be, for me, just the beginning of a long, beautiful experience. So Sophia Divinity School is actually run by the Catholic Apostolic Church of Antioch. They're related, and I serve on the board along with a number of people from Antioch. So through Sophia Divinity School, I encountered the independent Catholic movement. And from there, I just realized this is it. This is all the best stuff about what I grew up with. And yet it was in alignment with what I believe, which is that there is absolutely nothing wrong with gay people, and they should have all the same rights that we do. There's nothing less than about women, and there's no reason that they should be marginalized in our tradition. And a number of other aspects were significant for me, but that's pretty much, I think. I would say that in terms of a vocation, a lot of people have this idea that you have a vocation is a calling, literally, right? Mm-hmm. So some people have experienced what seemed to them like a very literal voice. Some people experience that as a kind of internal, wordless voice. For myself, I don't usually even use calling because for me, my vocation felt very much like an ongoing, inescapable ever deepening pull. I just felt pulled. I felt drawn. I felt more and more led into something that was right for me. And it was gradual for sure. I had no idea when I joined the seminary that I would be ordained as a priest. I thought, oh, this is great. Been out of college for a long time. I can take some classes and write some papers, and I can really grow a little bit spiritually. And I knew that the seminary offered ordination, but I was not at all sure that that's what was right for me. So over time, that became obvious that that was right for me.
Nice. And Father Scott, you used the words independent Catholic. We know that different people in our movement self-identify in different ways. How do you self-identify? Do you self-identify as independent Catholic? And if so, what does that mean for you?
Yeah, I do. I prefer independent Catholic. It's what I use. And I do so because for me, it's the most honest and descriptive terminology because I am Catholic. There's no doubt about it. Sometimes people will say, why don't you describe yourself as Protestant if you're not in communion with Rome? And we can talk about that a little bit. But essentially, it's because I'm not Protestant. I'm not protesting the Roman Catholic Church. I am still Catholic. It's just that the Catholic Apostolic Church of Antioch and the other independent Catholic churches are independent of Roman control. As you said earlier, we're autocephalous, so we're self-headed. We don't need to follow the dogmatic proclamations or the administrative control of the bishop in Rome, who I still respect as a wonderful person and I think he is a great source of spiritual guidance. And I have a brother who's a Roman Catholic deacon. Wow. So I in no way want to put down the Roman Catholic approach to Christianity. And I also am not interested in poaching people or wrestling people away from something. When I meet people who were Roman Catholic and are intrigued by this independent Catholic thing and say, I'm thinking about going back to church, I encourage them to go back first to the church that they grew up with. I encourage them to make sure, try to find out whether or not you're in the right place. Yeah. So the independent Catholic thing, we're not in communion with Rome, and that gives us both some extra freedom, but it also gives us some extra responsibility. As you know, we're both in touch with many, many people who take knowing that our apostolic succession passes through a line called the Old Catholics. They identify very strongly with Old Catholicism, Catholics who are also not in communion with Rome, but are more tightly organized. I don't do that in part because I'm afraid that it runs the risk of misleading people and that they might misunderstand and think that we're in communion with the Union of Utrecht and a lot of the European Old Catholics who have a very structured system. So in the same way that it would be dishonest for me to claim to be Roman Catholic, and that might hurt people who thought they were getting something from me that they weren't, I don't personally claim to be Old Catholic.
There you go. Father Scott, I am totally with you there. For me, it's a question of honesty as well, but I just really appreciate your wrapping some clarity around that. So I have to ask, Father Scott, because I was a Roman Catholic priest for more than 10 years before I discovered independent Catholicism. And I hear of your own upbringing in the Roman Catholic Church too. Tell me, how was it that you discovered independent Catholicism?
I think it was through Sophia Divinity School and the online searching sort of, I always and continue to read widely in spiritual and philosophical areas just for my own entertainment and edification. But I don't recall having heard about the independent Catholic movement before discovering Sophia and the Church of Antioch. So I was fortunate, and I did run across a number of people and organizations in the movement during that exploration. There were other options in terms of where I might study, but Sophia was fantastic because it was relatively inexpensive. It was mostly distance learning. There is some travel that's required. Um, Convocations that are recommended, that kind of thing. But for me, it just was a perfect mix. Yeah. So, and then once I learned about independent Catholicism, it was, you couldn't stop me. Like, it just seemed perfect in a lot of ways. And I know, to be honest, the truth is that all religious organizations are organizations that are made up of human beings, and that's challenging. And so we have all the same problems that other organizations have. I understand that, but I do. Independent Catholicism for me is just the perfect thing.
I love it. So I have to ask one step further then. If I'm understanding you correctly, you learned about independent Catholicism through the Sophia Divinity School. How did you learn about the Sophia Divinity School? Was it something that you were Googling or some topic of interest that you were pursuing?
Right. I think online, as after my daughter was born, and I gradually became more and more interested in finding some way to express in the real world, in my daily life, my own spirituality, and to see if there was but we did the thing that most new parents do. We went around, we did the show, we did the tour, we went to a variety of different churches. My wife is a wonderful person, but she probably would describe herself as agnostic. And we did the tour. She loves the idea of community, though, so we went to the local Roman Catholic church and started checking out some of our other options. It did not go very well. But there was something there. There's something wonderful about the Catholic way of life. And that is the way that I look at it. I take that bigger philosophical, anthropological approach, and I say that religions are like languages, right? Religions are expressions that are meant to point to a reality beyond itself. So in the same way that if I bump into someone on the street in Mexico and it's a hot day and we look up, we are in no way going to get into an argument over whether that thing is the soul, El Sol, or the sun, right? The fact that we have different words for that experience is not as important as the fact that we both have a word for that experience. So their religion, to me, is very similar. It's easy to get hung up on the dogma and it feels so right and it feels so important that people can believe that this is the one right way for everyone. It's the single best way in all circumstances to describe the way things are, the ultimate reality, that mystery that we live within, right? But the truth is that I need to leave room for people to find their own best way, and trying to coerce or convince someone is less effective than showing them an example of what it might mean to run across someone who is living that way of life.
Right. So. Father Scott, we are going to come back in a moment to your background in comparative religions, because I think that's fascinating and probably enriches your ministry in different ways. But first, let's talk about your ministry. Of all the ministries in independent Catholicism, I have to say you get a prize for one of the most tremendous names of ministry. So you currently serve the Pilgrim Chapel of Contemplative Conscience. Unpack that for us and help us to understand the Pilgrim Chapel of Contemplative Conscience.
Okay, I know, and it's a horrible URL. It really, Pilgrim Chapel of Contemplative Conscience.org. It's unwieldy. But so I'll go back first and explain that the name is what it is because Sophia Divinity School did such a good job, I think. Their role when they encounter people like me is to help in spiritual formation, but also with discernment. So their job, which they did phenomenally well was over time to work with me and to try to get me to objectively evaluate my own gifts, because we all have them and they're all different.
Yeah.
And to build a ministry around my calling and those gifts. So what is needed in the world? And what is it that people, and again, as objectively as possible, they're working with people to try to say, well, if you're going to serve, what objectively do you really bring? Not what do you enjoy, which is also good to know, but what do people repeatedly thank you for in a profound way? What is it that matters, right? So they did a very good job of working with me over a long time. And what emerged was this ministry of the Pilgrim Chapel of Contemplative Conscience, and it pretty much is what it says. So it is a church. It has a mission, which is to practice, promote, and support independent Catholic spirituality, especially the traditions of pilgrimage,
Awesome.
contemplation, and informed conscience. So the pilgrim part is that we have no building. I go wherever people need me. And also we're all pilgrims, right? We're all on the way. Anybody who's a Christian, the first Christians were called, among other things, followers of the way. And I think it's useful to acknowledge with some humility that we don't have all the answers, but we know we're headed in the right direction. So the Pilgrim Chapel is pilgrim in the sense that I go where people need me. Sometimes I'm literally supporting pilgrims who are, I live in Ashland, Oregon. So the Pacific Crest Trail, which is a hiking trail that goes from Mexico to Canada through the United States, actually passes by here within a few miles. And so I've married hikers who were through hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, and I do outreach to try to help people who are doing spiritual or philosophical travel in a physical sense. Wow. And then obviously I do that in a Christian sense in the bigger picture along the way. The contemplative part comes in because, partly along the lines of what I was discussing earlier, I have a very strong attraction to the contemplative and mystical side of the Christian tradition. To me, the fascinating part about what we all have in common as human beings in the great religious traditions of the world is that they all have this mystical tradition that links us to the body. You know, that is the thing that we all share. So there are these practices, and they express themselves differently in different traditions. You know, there's Sufism in the Muslim traditions. You have Zen and Taoism, and they're across the whole range of the great religious traditions of humanity. There is always a body of tradition that seeks to share practices that don't guarantee you. It's not magic. It's not mechanical, push the button, get this result. But if you participate in a discipline over a long period of time, you do open yourself up to the possibility of transforming yourself in a very positive way. And I think it was Father Thomas Keating who said that Christianity is primarily about a transformation of consciousness. I think that people can quibble about the use of primarily and what that might mean exactly, but I do think that inherent to Christianity is this idea that we have to be open to being transformed. If I'm not willing to really grapple with this tradition and make it my own, if I'm not willing to be open, and if I don't want to be changed by it, really, what good is it? It's dead history. Right? So the mystical side of things is something that the Pilgrim Chapel of Contemplative Conscience teaches and practices and supports. And, that it's a whole range of things. I have my daily practices, obviously, that are my own, and I will share and teach those with anybody who's interested. But I also I'm a volunteer at a local hospital, and until the shutdown recently, I went every Saturday and I taught contemplative prayer. I taught prayer of the cloud, so something that some people know is centering prayer, but I was not trained by the folks from contemplative outreach, so I don't want any confusion there. But the very similar contemplative silent prayer, prayer beyond words, uh, teach that at the hospital, and I work with people who are interested in the more mystical side of Christianity. Again, sometimes it's scary to people who, the word mystics and mystical and all that, but it's very much a part of Christian tradition and Catholic tradition, and it is not hard to find that in the scripture and in the story of Jesus if you are open to it. So, and then the conscience, the aspect of conscience is one of the most important to me, in part because that's why I'm here, right? That's why I don't attend a Roman Catholic church. This is in no way to criticize the Roman Catholic Church, because there is a profound, and you know this, there is a profound tradition of respect and insistence on the importance of the individual human conscience in Roman Catholicism. Before Benedict became Pope, when he was younger and commenting on Vatican II, he, and you can Google this, he made the comment that if there is a conflict between your divinely given individual conscience and what you know to be right in your informed conscience and an external authority, even if that authority is the church, your duty is to follow God through following your conscience. So it's very much a part of Roman Catholic tradition. Now, that did not get emphasized after Benedict became Pope. And their approach leans heavily on this idea of your conscience must be informed, and that means informed by the Roman Catholic Church. So if you differ in teaching, it's a challenge for you. And again, I love the Roman Catholic Church. I just think that, in talking to you, I know that we've often described things, the situation of Catholics in the world as in terms of ships, and some are bigger than others. And the Roman Catholic Church is that biggest ship. So it takes the longest time to turn around. So I'm optimistic that eventually the Roman Catholic Church will draw closer to all of us and will reorient itself in the ways that seem obviously better to many of us. It took 400 years, but they eventually did apologize to Galileo for showing him the instruments of torture, right? I think eventually it's possible that they will come around on women's ordination and the full humanity of gay people and the whole list. But honestly, I'm not willing to wait. I think that there are Catholics out there now who really deserve the opportunity to come closer to God and each other. So that's why the name, that's why conscience is so important to me.
There you go. Father Scott, really appreciate that. I think that's why many of us find ourselves in the independent Catholic boat or in various independent Catholic boats, simply because, the Roman Catholic Church is a large ship. It doesn't turn on a dime. And some of us are just, the vision that we have for this world and for the church is of something that better meets the needs of the world today. So really appreciate that. I just thinking of the rich spiritual sources in our tradition. St. Francis of Assisi, at the beginning of the 13th century, my own background is as a conventual Franciscan. And, in the beginning of the 13th century, he said, if the Pope asks you to do something against your conscience, don't do it. The conscience reigns supreme. So just really appreciate your highlighting that, especially on this week. This week, we're celebrating the birthday of Father Charles Curran, who back in the 1970s stirred up so much trouble in the Roman Catholic Church as a Roman Catholic priest, simply because he raised questions on various moral issues. So really appreciate your drawing our attention to that, Father Scott.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Father Scott, tell us, you are part of the Catholic Apostolic Church of Antioch. What do we need to know about the Catholic Apostolic Church of Antioch? Tell us all about it.
Okay, the Catholic Apostolic Church of Antioch is an amazing. It's actually not numerically very large, as you know from your efforts to. You're one of the few people who's actively cataloging all of the independent and old Catholics currently active in the States, and we are in those. Nautical terms, we are a tiny little skiff, or we're a bunch of canoes, just sort of paddling around frantically trying to do the good that we can. The church is, so we're Catholic in all those traditional ways. I guess I should start by saying that the Catholic Apostolic Church of Antioch, to the extent that it is known in part because it was we had an academic named Dr. Julie Hofstra who was embedded with us for a few years, and as used Antioch as the example to a starting point to talk about the independent Catholic movement. And she wrote a fantastic book called The Other Catholics.
Nice. That's Julie Byrne, correct? Julie Byrne of Hofstra University?
Exactly. And she's a wonderful person, and we love her very much. So we are Catholic in the ways that she chose to describe Catholicism. She's shaking things out, saying academically, what can we fairly use? What characteristics define Catholicism? There are all these people who are not in communion with Rome. So how do we separate them in terms of Catholic or not Catholic? How do we fairly treat them? And so she came up with these four things that fairly describe. And she says succession, sacraments, saints, and then she also used a fourth, which I throw another S in there to help me remember, which is we self-identify as Catholics. So first, the Catholic Apostolic Church of Antioch is Catholic in the sense that it self-identifies as Catholic. We're strongly grounded in the Catholic tradition, even though our background goes through not just the Roman Catholic side, but also through the Eastern Orthodox side and all the way back to the very beginning. So apostolic succession is that second thing that Dr. Byrne describes as Catholic, and the Catholic Apostolic Church of Antioch has valid apostolic succession. For some people, that's not important, but for me, it's important because it's important to others. The people I serve sometimes want to know that you can trace back the Church of Antioch through a line, and most of the major religions have something similar, where they have a line of succession. They have a lineage that matters to them. This person was taught by that person, and that person was taught by that person. And you go back to the founder or the earliest times, and there's a reassurance that what you're passing along is valid and important, something worth sharing, and that it defines the tradition. So the Catholic Apostolic Church of Antioch is also Catholic in the sense that we have apostolic succession. Eventually, if you go back far enough, it overlaps with the lines of succession that the Roman Catholic Church has. And that's as it should be, right? We should be looking back before there was a Protestant Reformation, before there was an old Catholic split, obviously, before there was a schism between East and West. We should go be remembering that, that great line from the creeds, which you find even in some churches that are less overt about embracing the word Catholic, the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. Because Catholic, I think it's worth remembering, means of the whole, universal. And the Church of Antioch is that, in the sense that we are, you can describe us as a denomination, a flavor, a different boat, or in any way that works, but we're still all part of that one body of Christ, that mystical body. That no matter how we break up the administration, and I hope we do that according to our gifts and the gifts that we can give, I think that it's important always to remember that we, like the Catholic Apostolic Church of Antioch, are Catholic in the sense that we belong to that one Catholic body of Christ, that one Christian body. Dr. Byrne also talks about the sacraments, and that is key to the Church of Antioch because it's key to Christianity, right? You go back to the founders saying, do this in memory of me, and the liturgy being the work of the people and the thing that we do that reminds us, it recollects and makes present Christ in our midst, which we're told in Scripture is not only a possibility but a promise. And so we're a sacramental church. The Church of Antioch is very interested in liturgy. The thing I like about it is that it's both very traditional and at the same time it's pretty progressive. So the thing about the independent Catholic movement, as you know, is that once you're free from the control of Rome, you then can move in whatever direction you believe is right. There are some independent Catholic churches that move in the direction of Antioch and being a little more progressive and thinking that this is how Jesus would want things. But there are some that insist that the right way to go is to move farther in the other direction, that the Roman Catholic Church went wrong when it turned the priest around to face the congregation, and when the Roman Catholic Church started allowing priests to speak in a language that the people understood. So there are some very, very, very conservative Catholic, independent Catholic churches. We're not among that group. We're among the Church of Antioch is progressive and inclusive. And one of the things I love it is in our sacramental expression, we are not only more inclusive in terms of our terminology, where you might hear someone say, in the name of God, whom we worship as Father or Mother, because even the Roman Catholics have always understood that God transcends our definitions of gender and our ideas about sex and all of those things, that God is bigger than all of that. But so, we have a more inclusive terminology, but also what I love about it from the sacramental side is that Antioch is very interested in sacramental justice. So we look out at the world and we see people who are suffering because sadly they've been hurt by the people who are most responsible for helping them. So I do a lot of outreach to people who feel marginalized or excluded or hurt by the church. And I other people have said this, but people have heard the name Jesus. The days when we have to walk door to door and pound on the door and say, have you heard about Jesus? I think have been replaced by the days in which, sadly, more of my work involves undoing the damage from the people who've pounded on doors and insisted this is the one right way you have to be. And so Antioch's insistence on being present for people sacramentally is very important to me, and I very much value it. I want to talk too about something that's related. When people have visited the Church of Antioch for convocations and other things that we've done, sometimes I've heard bishops say it, I've heard visitors say it. It's what you're doing is a ministry of presence, that you're showing up for people. So we do have some ministries we're scattered around the country, and Antioch does have you can walk into a parish and have a parish priest style of approach. Father Ron Catherson is a fantastic example of that. And he's in New Mexico. But we also have people who go to prisons. We have people who volunteer in hospitals, as I do. We have people who are trail side. We have people who are meeting as needed wherever they're needed. We're just trying to listen and show up. And I know it's making a difference, which is why I continue to do it. The last thing I'd say about Dr. Burns' book and what makes Antioch in particular a traditionally Catholic church is that the Catholics love the saints, right? They love the saints. You get sometimes objections saying, oh, the Catholics have this scary worship of the saints. Well, it's not worship, it's veneration, it's honoring, it's a profound appreciation. And we have this Christian idea that we're surrounded by a cloud of witnesses, that the people who lived, who have done beautiful things in the past and can inspire us, are never entirely gone. Our loved ones are never entirely gone. They're with us in a profound way. And we should not shut ourselves off to being open to their influence. So Antioch has a profound reverence for the saints that I appreciate. And it would include among that group Mary. So there is historically in Antioch, there's a deep appreciation for Mary and an understanding that the feminine is just as divine as the masculine. And we need to remember that, especially when we know that we are carrying on a tradition that at one point was extremely patriarchal, right? That did tend to devalue women. So one of the things I love about Antioch is we have female bishops and priests. We in the past, we've had a matriarch in addition to a patriarch. So just history, very brief history, although we have apostolic succession that makes us a part of the mystical body going back to the earliest years in the founder. The Church of Antioch was incorporated in the late 50s in California and has historically grown from that. Herman Spruitt was the founder, the incorporator, and he was this amazing person that I never met. I met Mary Spruitt, who became the matriarch later, who's wonderful. But while in seminary, there's some required reading that is historical reading from Herman Spruitt. And my impression of him, the only way I can convey what he meant to me was that this fellow, he had all these interests, all these metaphysical and widespread. He himself was Methodist at an earlier time. But had these extended, an amazingly open person spiritually. But to me, the impressive thing was that he just seemed like a love bomb. Like if you read his writings, it just seemed like he was interested in all these things because he sort of overflowed into all of them. It's like, oh, that expresses this beautifully. Or, oh, that is another fantastic way to say this. So, and because the Antioch Church was so open, and that's not just a point of pride, it is a raison d'etre. It's one of our reasons for being at all is to offer tradition with openness, because it seems to be the right thing. So I think, I don't know what else I can say about Antioch other than the current presiding bishop is Mark Elliott Newman, who's a fantastic individual. I know you've met him. He went with me to Austin, and I could spend a lot of time talking about the things that I appreciate about Bishop Mark and the way in which he does that independent Catholic thing, right? It's herding cats. Yeah. He takes people who have very, very different ideas and he finds some common ground and he opens up a space for them to grow and yet keeps the organization functioning, right? And then, we have some other amazing bishops and priests, and it's just a wonderful thing to be a part of. It's hard for me to imagine. I do know other jurisdictions, and Bishop Mark made me the ecumenical officer, an interreligious affairs officer for the church, I think within the last year. And so I'm being privileged to travel quite a bit and to meet a number of people in the independent and old Catholic movements. And I'm meeting amazing people, and I'm so excited by it and so honored to be a part of it. I got to attend a meeting of independent Catholic bishops as a lowly priest. Special consideration, got to sneak in the door. And I'm just so, I'm blown away by the love and the caring and the breadth of ideas, but also the ability to keep coming back. You know, in all of these independent Catholic struggles to draw together, there are sometimes blow-ups, and people move in different directions, and there are normal human challenges. I'm so impressed with the idea that, okay, I did that's not my thing, and maybe I didn't like the way that felt, but you know what? There's something too wonderful to avoid here, and I'm coming back. I'm going to get closer to that person and that group, and we really are all one big body, and I think that's what Christ wants us to do, and I think that's the active work of the church. So I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to be a part of the Church of Antioch, and I love that we're getting closer to you and to so many other people in the independent Catholic movement, in the old Catholic movement, in the independent sacramental movement, in God's activity in the world.
Amen. Father Scott, really appreciate your telling us more about the Catholic Apostolic Church of Antioch, especially because you called to mind how it was that Dr. Julie Byrne, in her book, The Other Catholics, was essentially following you all and helping us to learn about the independent sacramental movement, but independent Catholicism through you and your church. That was really, really cool. And some of the concepts that you bring to mind, I just think are so important. The whole ministry of presence, which is so important to us in the independent Catholic movement. Sacramental justice. I don't think either of us could do justice in however many hours of talking about how important sacramental justice is for so many of us in the independent sacramental movement, helping to get the people of God the sacraments of the church that they so hunger for, is just an incredibly satisfying thing. I have to ask you, though, because you are with an independent Catholic church which has a long, rich history, the Catholic Apostolic Church of Antioch, which goes back to Herman and Mary Spruitt, some tremendous lights in the independent Catholic movement. Can you tell us anything about that very name, the Catholic Apostolic Church of Antioch? We know that there were 5 traditional patriarchates in the early church of Rome, not only Rome, but also more importantly, Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, and Constantinople. Why Antioch? Was there something about the Antiochian tradition and or about that church that inspired folks more than 60 years ago to choose that as the name?
Yeah, definitely there are individuals, and there have been individuals throughout the history of the Church of Antioch who've responded to that tradition in particular, and would make an effort to connect us historically and theologically to that geographical area. The most important, honestly, the most important thing about that name and the primary resonance is that Antioch is where Christians, we're told, were first called Christians. And it is a place in the world in which the movement, all those people who are so impressed with Jesus of Nazareth, so inspired, caught fire and moved out into the larger world to encounter everything that was going on at that time. So for most people within the Church of Antioch, the important thing about that name is not, we don't want people to believe that we're somehow in close connection and under the jurisdiction of a patriarch in Antioch in the Middle East. We're inspired by early Christianity, and that's the primary resonance.
Nice. And Father Scott, you tell us that you now work in ecumenical relations within the Catholic Apostolic Church of Antioch. So help us bring together that piece of ecumenism, but also your previous studies in comparative religion. Tell us, what does all of this mean, and how does it help to enrich your life, your ministry, independent Catholicism?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, I'll be honest, it's a new thing. I was surprised when Bishop Mark asked me to take the office. It has made me very busy. I've gotten to travel quite a bit because of it, and if think the world is what the world is now, so it may be canceled. But I was asked to travel to take 2 back-to-back courses in Utrecht in the Netherlands to study not only in Old Catholicism, but also the early Christian church and the future of our Christian church in the world. I have been trying to play catch up and sort of develop all these relationships. And Antioch is very interested in expanding its contacts. We're not territorial or at all interested in empire, but we're interested in having as many friends as we can have, I guess is the best way to say it. And it's so important for people who are Catholic but not in communion with Rome. So that's become an area of focus for me. Antioch really wants to mend all bridges and reconnect as much as possible and draw closer together and maximize our growth in Christ. That's what it's about. And I'm not only honored, but I feel an affinity for the work because of what we were describing earlier. I do, maybe this will help. But when I was in college, I went through the usual adolescent agony and later college and young adulthood and trying to figure out. And I just had this intellectual wall that I ran into. So this is the most ridiculous thing in the world. To think that out of all these traditions, all these ways of looking at the world, the one that I was born into is it's the one right way. We've got everything right. Everybody else is wrong. That's just ridiculous. It's intellectually untenable. It took me a long time to get to the other side of that, which is it did eventually occur to me that it's also equally, what do you want to say, full of hubris, nutty, wrong, to believe that out of all these great traditions in the world, all of these profound, multi-generational minds of human wisdom and experience, which the great traditions, the great religious traditions of the world all are, the great philosophical traditions, all the great ways of life, it's equally crazy for me to believe that out of all of those, that the one I was born into has nothing good or beautiful or true to say. So from an ecumenical point of view, I'm inspired by the comment that I read from the Dalai Lama when Christians approach him and say, what should I do? Should I become a Buddhist? Should I become a Tibetan Buddhist? How do I go forward? And his response is usually to tell people, no, if you're a Christian, you should be a better Christian, right? So for me, the ecumenical approach involves digging my well as deeply as possible so that I have the most to share with other people. Again, to go back to that language analogy, I took a course in Taoism and Zen Buddhism in college, and I took a course in Japanese civilization and Chinese history. And I could have, if I'd been intrigued enough and thought it was the right thing to do, moved to Japan and entered a Zen tradition, become a Buddhist monk, and there would have been nothing wrong with that. It would have been a profound and no doubt spiritually fulfilling path, as it is for some other people. But what I realize is that as skilled as I got, as fluent as I got in that language, in the language of Buddhism and all that it has to offer, or Taoism, that would always be a second language to me. That if I found an ideal version of what was my first language, I would always be able to help in a more profound way. I would always be more fluent in what I originally learned than I would be in all of the additional languages I might pick up. So I'm still interested in all those other things, but I am a Christian all the way down, and I am all in, and it is the deepest well I can dig, and it not only is the best for me, but it also offers me the most clear opportunity to help others, to share with others, that I can communicate best and most deeply in this tradition. So I think that's the spirit of the ecumenical movement, right? The idea that I'm in no way disparaging what you have, because I know what I have and how much I value it. So I immediately understand how reluctant you are to give up the core of yourself and the divinity that you feel within.
Tremendous. Father Scott, appreciate that. To me, it very much reminds us in our public schools here in Austin, we talk about like dual language and how it is that one language enriches the others. It's almost like with comparative religions, it's almost like, these other perspectives really enrich our lives and our ministries and the lives of those whom we serve. So just really appreciate your perspectives on that. Yeah. Tell me, Father Scott, what have been some of the greatest joys of ministry in serving God's people? Are there any joys that you might point to, or any particular experiences that just leave your heart feeling overflowing with joy?
Yeah, there are many, and I think that's in some ways that you always want to believe that you're being as altruistic as possible, but I honestly, I get so many rewards myself. I feel so blessed so often that and maybe that's the trick, right? You find the thing that makes you happiest, and it in turn allows you to make other people as happy as possible. I experience profound joy. I have a spiritual practice of my own that involves daily prayer. I do prayer of the cloud. I do the Jesus prayer. I practice various kinds of Christian meditation. Obviously, I do Lectio, divine reading, and I obviously read the scriptures. I have, if you have a contemplative practice or a mystical practice of some kind, a profound spiritual practice, what you find is that, as I said, it's not a push-pull mechanical thing. There's no guarantee, but you do tend to have more often these experiences that seem to come from outside you, and yet they seem to reconnect you with everything. I have experiences that are profound and that make me feel overwhelmed. Sometimes they involve tears, sometimes overwhelming joy. I don't think that's the point, but it certainly is wonderful when those things happen. I think I'm profoundly grateful and happy about the fact that I'm becoming, I hope, better person. One of the great things about the Catholic tradition is that it does not, the goodness that a priest does is not dependent on the goodness of the priest, right?
Amen.
That they're channeling something big, Christ present. So in the early years of Catholic tradition, they decided, yeah, even though that fellow now is what we would call a heretic, you're still married or you're still baptized, that the good comes regardless of the virtue of the priest, because he's not there representing himself. So I take some solace in the fact that I don't need to be as good as I want to be. But I also do hope that over time I'm becoming a better person, more, more pleasant to be around. And one of the great things about the independent Catholic tradition is that I'm married, right? I have a 20-year-old daughter. And I hope my involvement with the church and my spiritual side is making me better, not only for myself, but for them. I do think that I've had very, very many moments of overwhelming joy participating in the sacraments of the church. So, which is also something that Dr. Byrne describes in visiting Antioch. That I think she has a chapter called "Weeping and Woo Woo," describing the kind of the more New Agey sort of attractions that some of us in Antioch have or had, and but also this during the traditional liturgy, there are sometimes moments where people who are just visiting, but certainly for myself, I am often overwhelmed with joy, just overcome with joy that, sometimes it can be embarrassing when I suddenly come back to myself and I realize, wow, there are tears. There are just tears rolling down your cheeks. But I think it's a beautiful thing, and that's definitely among the joys that I would describe as a result of doing what I do. I also I have been overwhelmed with joy when I think about the opportunities that I've been given, because I had all these resistances. I did not want to be that guy, right? When I was in seminary, I told my bishop, I really don't want to wear the collar. I really don't. Is there any, do I have to? Is it, because for me, that represented, I didn't want people to think that I thought I was better than they are, because I knew I wasn't. And I didn't want it to separate me from other people. So wouldn't it be tragic if the thing that I was, growing into was going to be the thing that kept me from being close to other people? But as with so many things over the course of my spiritual formation in seminary, I realized I was profoundly wrong, because once I started wearing the collar in public, and I don't wear it all the time, I wear it when I work, or I'm in appropriate settings, but I do wear it regularly, and it has been an amazing thing. It has made me so happy to over and over again run into people who found me only because I was wearing the collar, approached me only because I was wearing the collar, and some of them have had great experiences with the church and religious organizations in general, some the opposite. But it has opened up all of these opportunities that people express profound gratitude for sharing with me that I never would have had otherwise, that I was just so wrong about. So that's another area in which I'm surprised by joy all the time, right? So.
Tremendous. What about challenges, Father Scott? Are there any challenges that are inherent in ministry, or what have been some of the challenges that you've encountered?
Yeah, I it is when you're trying to reach out to people who are who have been marginalized and hurt, especially by organized religion. That in itself is, you have to accept it. You have to turn that challenge into a joy, right? You have to know that's part of your mission, to try to deal with people who ought to have experienced as their interaction with religion something beautiful, and instead experienced abuse or hurt or marginalization or a lack of appreciation. So that's a challenge, I would say. And then all the usual stuff, right? It's time and money. We're all only here for a short period of time, right? It's what we do with that time that matters. So time is definitely a challenge when you perceive what you're doing and the activity that you're involved in as worth doing. You always feel like you could do more. And then money, we are worker priests, so we are not paid by the Church of Antioch. It's that old Christian model of a tent maker, right? You do need to make a living in the real world. And so for me, my wife and I, many years ago, started a graphic design business, and I was a copy editor and a designer and sort of only adequate illustrator. And my wife is now running that business by herself, which is a huge job. And I'm dependent on her, and our family is dependent on her to a huge degree, even more than, the automatic emotional, like, I love this person, she's the most wonderful person in the world. And I'm just dependent on her in a lot of ways, and grateful to her in so many ways anyway. But money is an issue. I have been very fortunate in that, we're on the upward arc. I don't take a salary, but we're trending positively. When I first started, when I was in seminary, a great thing about the Catholic Apostolic Church of Antioch and the Sophia Divinity School is they very wisely insist that they're people who, when they become deacons, they need to incorporate and build a legal and legally responsible structure. So that's when the local ministries come into existence. So along with that came a model of how will this ministry support itself. And the Pilgrim Chapel never charges for spiritual services, and that's everything we do. So weddings, anything you can imagine, there's never a bill. What I do is I make clear that the only reason that I can continue to do this is because people who have are sharing with people who don't have. So if you can afford it, I will gratefully accept a donation. And so I do donations online. The other thing about the church that I have, the local ministry, is that because I don't have a building, I do a lot of outreach digitally, virtually, in social media. And yet at the same time, I'm such a huge believer, even though I don't have a building, I'm a huge believer in being physically present for people. So that's why the current situation is very challenging for me, because for somebody who's so online and so connected, I am not, I haven't historically, and I ideally don't want to be devoting my ministry to a virtual online ministry. I want to, as much as possible, work on the behalf of everybody to get us all back to normal, so that we can actually touch and hug and be there in person for people. I was a volunteer at the hospital, and they asked the volunteers not to come in. I can't hold hands with someone who's dying virtually. There are people who are in positions where the physical presence matters to them. And so it's a challenging position that I'm in now, in that sense. And then I have, I'm a human being, so I have physical limitations. I would love if I could to the Camino de Santiago, if I could do some of these long distance pilgrimages. I have some bone and joint and other issues that make that not possible for me. But I can support everybody who's doing it, and who knows, maybe there might be a way to do to take smaller bites, or to set up my world and my health so that maybe someday I can.
There we go. Father Scott, appreciate that. Before I open up the mic and ask anything else you'd like to share with us, I just have to draw our attention to that lovely piece of art behind you, because in the middle of this pandemic, it screams Easter joy to see these flowers blooming. Is there a story behind this piece of art?
Oh, that is a bit of painting from my daughter, who was very young at the time, and I do love it for all the reasons that you're describing. It just kind of overwhelms me with joy. It's a beautiful thing, and I love the way the red is so rich, and it's vibrant, but it hints at the fact that life is deeper.
Yeah.
You know, it's not the pastel joy. It's a deep, bloody, all in it commitment to joy and life. And I love the way it pops against the green of this room. So that's why I have it. My daughter now is 20 years old, and she's sort of quarantined with us here along with her boyfriend, because she attends school in Poughkeepsie in New York at Vassar. And so now she's in her second year, but now she's taking classes online from them. And we're all stuck trying to be the best people we can together.
Let her know there's an admirer of her art here. For those of us who prepare to enter Holy Week next week, we know that the color of Good Friday is red, so we see the red in that, but we also see how it is that that's not the end of the story, that the lily-looking flower, the white flower against that background, gives us all hope as we pass through this pandemic. Father Scott, I'm going to open up the microphone.
I'm not sure if you seem to have frozen, and I'm not sure if we've been cut off or if I'm still on. So, Father Jamie, I'm going to proceed. I can't hear you, but I'm going to proceed with the closing prayer that you asked for. And unless you interrupt me, what I will do is, what I'd like to share is a piece of the liturgy. This is from the local Pilgrim Chapel liturgy that we do. It might seem familiar. Did I lose you, Father Jamie? Might seem familiar to a lot of people. It is the general intercessions and prayer of the faithful. So this will be an opportunity, if we're still on, for all of us to pray together through these challenging times. Okay. I'm being told that we've been bumped off. So thank you very much. Love to you and to everyone. Bye-bye.